Good morning. Welcome to today's daily Bible reading for October 8th, 2020. My name's Scott. Excited you're joining us. You've been with us throughout this week. You know that we're starting a new series this weekend called The King's Cross. It's actually kind of part two of our study in the book of Mark. The first part, which just finished, was called Jesus the King. And it really was about how the first part of Mark tells us all about Jesus' authority, about his power, about really that he is the king of the entire universe. And then halfway through the book of Mark, it sort of takes a turn. And then we start to see that Jesus is not just the king of the universe, but he is a king who willingly lays down his life and takes up a cross. And so that's kind of what this next few weeks are going to be about as we look at the King's Cross and what it means for Jesus to be the king who takes up the cross. And this morning we're going to be in Mark chapter 9, beginning in verse 2. So let's take a look at that. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him and led them up a high mountain where they were all alone. There he was transfigured before them. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. And there appeared before them Elijah and Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say. They were so frightened. Then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud, "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they no longer saw anyone with them except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus gave them orders not to tell anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They kept the matter to themselves, discussing what rising from the dead meant. And they asked him, "Why did the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah does come first and restores all things. Why then is it written that the Son of Man must suffer much and be rejected?" So this passage is actually the passage that Pastor Brett will be sharing from this weekend. He's got a great message about what it means for Jesus to really reflect and display God's glory and how he does that through the entirety of his life. And so I don't want to steal any of Brett's thunder and kind of take all his points because they're great. So you should watch church this weekend or join us on Sunday night. But I really wanted to kind of focus in on the reaction of disciples to this moment, to the transfiguration of Jesus. Jesus takes his 3 close disciples, Peter, James, and John. If Jesus had a MySpace, Peter, James, and John would be in his top 3. And so they go up to the mountain and Jesus is transfigured. He is transformed in that moment. He's revealed in all of his glory. He's glowing. His clothes are bleached whiter than anyone could bleach them. Like he's this shining figure. And then Moses and Elijah, 2 of Israel's greatest heroes, show up and they are just hanging out, talking with Jesus. And the Bible tells us that the disciples do not know how to respond. The Bible says they're scared. And so Peter says, in his fear, in his confusion, "Jesus, it's great that we're here. Let's build 3 shelters, 3 tents for you, for Elijah and Moses, and then we can just hang out." Peter recognized something in that moment, that it was a great experience. It was great for them to be in the presence of Jesus in all of his transformed glory. It was great to be there, and Peter wanted to stay. He wanted to stay in that moment. He didn't want to go back down the mountain. He wanted to stay right there in that moment. And sometimes we feel that way, right? Maybe it's a great vacation. I spent a lot of time in youth ministry where I was talking about that mountaintop camp experience, how we never want to leave camp. We just want to stay at camp because life is so much easier at camp. But Jesus doesn't call us to stay on the mountain. Jesus doesn't call us to stay on vacation. Jesus doesn't call us to stay at camp. Jesus calls us to go out into the world. Jesus calls us to experience his glory, to experience his love, to experience his kingdom, and then to go down into the world, to leave the mountain and then share that with everyone around us. It's even the command that Jesus gives to Peter, James, and John. He says, "Don't tell anybody about this yet. But once I've come back from the dead, then tell everyone you can the glory that you experienced on this mountain with Jesus Christ." So we know what it's like to want to stay in a place, stay where it's safe, stay where we're experiencing God's goodness and God's grace and his love and his mercy, and we just kind of want to stay in that nice little bubble. But Jesus calls us beyond the bubble. Jesus calls us to experience his glory and then to leave the mountain and reveal his glory in the world around us, whether that's providing for our neighbors through our Be a Neighbor campaign. Maybe that's inviting somebody to watch church with you on a Sunday morning. Maybe it's going on a mission trip when we go on a mission trip. But there's so many ways for us to share the glory of Jesus with the world around us. But we cannot do it on the mountain. We have to leave that place where we feel safe and secure. Leave that place so we can actually bring the glory of Jesus to a world that so desperately needs it. Because within that glory is also his grace and his love and his mercy and his peace and his justice and his righteousness. All those things we are called to share that we cannot share on the mountain. We must leave the mountain in order to share the glory of Jesus. In the Old Testament, Moses, who makes a cameo in this passage, he often met with God in a shelter, in a tent, in a tabernacle. He would meet with God. And then because he had met with God face to face, Moses would walk out and his face would be shining like a glow stick in the middle of the night. Like Moses' face would just shine. So much so that the people made him put on a veil so he wouldn't keep him up at night. That's not why. But he just had to wear a veil to cover this shining. How great would it be if you and I were to spend so much time in God's presence that when we went out into the world, when we left the mountain, people couldn't help but notice God's glory reflecting off of us and all that we did. So how can you reflect God's glory this week? Who in your life could use some of that glory, some of that love, some of that peace, some of that grace in their life this week? Think about how you might share that and then go out and do it. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be back again tomorrow. Then we have service this weekend, 9:15, 11 o'clock online, or on the lawn at 6 o'clock on Sunday night. Have a great week. We'll see you guys real soon.